Hi everyone, Ryan Duffy here from Precision Microbes.
And Tommy Heffernan here for Precision Microbes, back for Tech in 10, our weekly under 10-minute session on some technical topic. Today we're going to cover one that's going to be very relevant over the coming weeks.
Yep.
And there's probably two phases to this, Ryan. We're just going to look at lungworm first of all as a parasite.
Yep.
We might do coughing cows in another video because that seems to be a big issue on dairy farms. Let's go. Off we go. So lungworm, what is it? Parasite? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's a parasite called Dictyocaulus viviparus. It's a massive issue in grazing systems, particularly in first grazing calves in the first grazing season.
Okay.
But certainly it has reared its head more and more. It seems to become more of an issue in replacement heifers and even in adult cows.
I would say a big issue in adult cows in the last 5 to 10 years. And some farms really struggle with it, but it's complex. We might talk about coughing cows separately because it does open the door. Because we're now coming into a period post-rain, it might be a bit early in the season, but maybe we're covering it a bit early. Typically what you see is the right conditions for lungworms for hatching, and you tend to see it from maybe now on, but particularly in the back end of the season, you'll see it in sucklers, but we do see it in dairy farms from now on.
Yeah, good heat. Lots of moisture. It's the perfect thing for all of those larvae to be developing.
Let's go through the life cycle now. I am going to win no awards from my art, but we'll say this is a cow, a ruminant of some shape or form. Let's talk about the life cycle from an airway. I know I can see you laughing over there, but let's talk about the life cycle. The adult cow will pick up, so the feces here is obviously part of it. So it's L1 to L4, isn't it, the stages of larvae from egg, isn't it?
To 5, yeah.
L5, okay.
Yep.
So basically they pick up L3s from pasture, isn't it?
Yes, that's the infective stage.
And that goes into the gut, goes through the gut, migrates to the lungs, develops the adults.
Yes.
And then those adults produce eggs which break out into larvae, coughed up, spit out back into dung. And if you have the right conditions, and there's a fungus called pilobolus in the feces, that they are shot out onto grass where those L3s become infective again. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and even like cattle walking through the dung, or even rain is going to assist those L3s disseminating away from cow pats and everything. But yeah.
That's important cycle to understand, because we want to talk about what the issue with cows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we're told to stay on camera here and we're shifting off it. So let's back on track. So, okay, that's life cycle is important. Clinical disease is kind of obvious. If we get adult lungworm inside in the lungs, there's a real mechanical impact.
Yes.
The migratory L3s, I think they're underestimated going through the lymphatic system and all that sort of stuff.
The impact, that's probably not as clear cut, but coughing cows, it's non-specific, unfortunately. I know a lot of the time we kind of go, well, it's this time of year, it could be this, it's most likely this, but coughing is a very non-specific sign. Reduced milk yield will be another thing, even impacts on fertility, people see that.
Yeah. So, but young stock typically, say your typical animals that present with it, it's like a smoker's cough. It's kind of a deep lung cough. It's a raspy type of cough, isn't it?
Yeah. If you even think of where the lungworm, the adults actually embed, it's nearly towards the back end of the lungs. So it's a real, as you say, a smoker's cough. Wee bit of exudate, so it's a wee bit moist.
It's complicated in older cows with reinfection syndrome. And that's where typically we would have always seen with parasites that their young animals are exposed, we treat them, but they develop an immunity to them, and they have a resistance to it. But with adult cows, they have a partial immunity that develops. And will you explain what reinfection syndrome is in my crappy drawing here of the life cycle?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. Young stock have no immunity. So if we start seeing clinical disease in them, it makes sense. They've never been exposed and therefore they have no immunity. Whereas older animals, you'd like to think that they have immunity and you'd like to think that it's full, so there's no issue. Unfortunately, there is this syndrome known as reinfection syndrome, or acute larval migration, where for whatever reason there has been a reduction in immunity or lack of development of immunity. Now, that
specific immunity in the lungs.
Specifically against this disease process.
Yeah.
And as you say, specifically in the lungs, because what actually happens in reinfection syndrome is the adults aren't really doing very, very much. It's more so the babies.
These migrating L3s.
Yeah, they're moving through the lungs and causing that issue. Whereas there's a bit of immunity and that's kind of keeping the adults at bay.
Okay, and the adults don't, so you don't see the full clinical effects, and that impacts diagnostics and make lungworm, particularly reinfection syndrome, more difficult. Let's move on to diagnostics. So people are very familiar. I think, look, no one needs a medal for knowing if you've got Whoosy cattle. I mean, Whoos is almost descriptive, but you should never make presumptions, maybe. But if the conditions are right, particularly you've had a lot of rain and moisture, a dry time, it creates the opportunity for the fungus, the larvae to go in, and this mass emergence. So coughing is obviously one thing. Clinical signs on dung is a special Behrman technique, isn't there? For
Yeah, you can find the very early stages, or the L1 stage, so they come out pretty much hatched. So you're really looking for those L1 larvae.
bloods and milk for ELISAs and diagnostics, any reliable?
At a herd level, they're beneficial, there's no doubt about it, but trying to interpret them is a wee bit more difficult because, again, these animals should have had some exposure and some immunity to it. So that kind of complicates looking at milk and bloods, but it's certainly a good guide at a herd level.
Lung washing is becoming very popular. A lot of vets are doing it. You're flushing saline down into lungs because of particularly that reinfection syndrome where you're not going to see anything in feces. You're popping in a tube, you're ballooning it up, you're pushing in some saline, you're pushing it back, and you'll see these live larvae. Tricky to do. I've done good for them over my career. Tricky to do, but very, very useful when done as a tool.
Very visual.
Yeah, very visual. A lot more people will do that.
You go through the phases, going back to your life cycle. The larvae are coming in, they're penetrating the gut, then they come to this thing called the pre-patent phase. That's just before they start laying eggs.
Yeah.
So therefore, a lot of damage has actually been done here. But if we start to do feces analysis, we're not going to find any eggs because they haven't laid any eggs yet. Then we have the patent phase where eggs are being released, and therefore the feces are beneficial. Problem is that's 3, 4, 5 weeks after the infection. And then we frequently will treat during the patent phase, and post-patent there is a lot of irreparable damage. You kind of alluded to bacteria and viruses getting in off the back of lungworm, and that's where that can be a massive issue.
And that's what I've seen with coughing cows, and we will cover that as a separate topic. Risks, obviously, it seems to be increasing. You love data, you showed me all island data there. Yep. Tell me what that's telling us.
Weanlings, it's becoming a massive issue in animals between 6 and 12 months. It always has been because the lack of immunity.
But the cases are increasing.
But the cases are increasing year on year. Cows or adults, it's kind of going up and down, but it is kind of going in an upward trajectory as well. So it's making up about 20% of respiratory deaths in adult cows.
Okay.
In calves, unsurprisingly, it's making up a wee bit more. It's around 40%.
Okay, so risks are probably related to the conditions we see.
Yeah,
wet, summer.
We can't really control the weather.
We can't control the weather. Obviously, people talk about larvae and grasses as well. The type of grazing systems we have. I remember here, been at a talk from Neil Sargison. Our grazing management strategies are good. Grazing management strategies in the grassland system are the same things that parasites love.
Yes.
Right. So this is a real challenge. So when we look at control, obviously we want to cover this again. We've been asked to cover wormers, different types. The only thing I'll say is that, look, most classes of wormers will work against it. You have to be very specific with milking cows. People will know that. But I've been saying for a long time, I think there's resistance to lungworm. Now the science is saying, or the trials, there's evidence saying that we actually have resistance to some of the wormers.
It'd be shocking if we didn't, if we think about how much we've used.
Yeah.
For be it gutworm, be it for fluke or whatever, there's going to be massive resistance built into these things because we've used them for so much, for so long.
Now you've 1 minute and 40 seconds. We're going to talk about control. This challenge is rising. It's a bigger problem. What are the control strategies around lungworm? And I think this is where you need to work with your own vet. Here are my thoughts on it. Long-term, we need to look at grazing strategies as part of it. How we manage parasites along with grazing management, that's more complicated. Wormers, strategic use of wormers, which I think traditionally with roundworms, that's fine because you can monitor fecal egg counts and you can do, but with lungworms, you have to be watching weather patterns and conditions on the farm that make the risk go up, and you still need wormers as part of that thing. Vaccination, I'm not even sure if it's still available. I found it a very good tool using, I think, Husvac was the product. I'm not sure even people use that anymore. They were my strategies around it. A little bit more work on grazing, monitoring the conditions. Okay, so if we're in June now, if this was in July and we saw these conditions that we saw in the last week, heavy rain for a week, dry period, you'd see a load of coughing, wouldn't you?
Definitely. And it really depends on where we put those first grazing season calves. That's going to be really important for most people. to make sure that they're going on to what we class as clean pasture.
So you need to look at your grazing management strategy, because L1s, these will survive, these will survive over winter, won't they?
Unfortunately, they will, and sometimes they survive inside animals, but mainly it's the overwintering.
Any other tips you have for lungworm? We just covered the basics today on kind of overall strategy.
No, look, I think the big thing there is strategic worming as opposed to blanket treating them, because we know that it's more of an issue than actually lungworm itself, but lungworm is a big concern.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah.